I think the most obvious trends we've seen over recent years in Russia is really the kind of remarkable growth we've seen there. The defence budget has grown from around 41 billion in 2010 to around 78 billion in 2014. So that's almost doubled in nominal terms in that time. And that's seen Russian defence spending go to around the third highest total in the world. Perhaps more surprisingly as well, they've actually been one of the 10 fastest growing defence budgets in real terms over the last 3 years, which is quite surprising for a mature economy and a mature defence sector. The other thing that's worth noting on that level as well is that we're in the middle of a period of growth. The defence budget's due to grow another 20% next year, and that should take defence spending to around 91 billion in real terms by 2016. I think the important thing to know is that this is not a result of the Ukraine crisis. The Russian defence spending growth has been underway now since 2011, really, and the plans that they've got for growing the defence budget next year date from 2012. So really we're in a period of remarkable growth. It's based on a modernisation strategy where the Russian military is supposed to get all its military equipment up to a modern standard, or 70% of it up to a modern standard by 2020. So this is no knee-jerk reaction to what's going on in Ukraine. This is a concerted government policy and one that the government's been pursuing for a number of years. One of the questions that this kind of raises really is this level of growth sustainable? I think certainly increasing the defence budget in terms of dollars every year, real terms increases, are certainly sustainable, but the level of growth certainly isn't sustainable. And I think we've already seen signs of some strain on the Russian government spending, or at least signs that defence spending is starting to crowd out other areas of spending. So budgets for healthcare, education, housing, social policy all declined in 2014, and that was at the same time as defence budget increasing 18%, I think it was. So there's already been signs of strain on the budget, and with the economic slowdown and the effect that'll have on government revenue, you would expect that this kind of strain will continue and only get worse. That said, I think it's worth remembering that the Russian budget deficit is quite small. It's around 1% of GDP, less than 1% of GDP is projected this year. Public debt is around 8% of GDP, which is a manageable level. So there is room for spending growth going forward, but I think something kind of has to give. So the deficit is going to have to increase, or spending on these social policy areas will have to go down further, or the spending plans will have to be revised downwards. And we've already seen signs that that's happening. The growth projections for 2016 we think are going to come down. There's been signs from the government that that's already happening. And then real terms growth from 2017 is expected to be quite flat. One of the comparisons that's been made quite a lot over the last few months has been the difference between spending trends in NATO nations and also contrasting that with Russia. And while we've seen the Russian defence budget grow rapidly, what we've seen in NATO nations is that the overall spending has declined by around $180 billion from its peak in 2010 of around $1 trillion. At the same time, we've also seen that 13 of the 20 fastest declining defence budgets over the last 3 years have also been NATO nations. And while we've seen announcements since the Cardiff summit in September, NATO Cardiff summit, that some NATO members, especially in Eastern Europe, are going to increase defence spending, that won't be enough to offset the levels of decline that we're still seeing in the US, the UK, France, Spain, Italy, Germany. So NATO defence spending will continue to decline until at least 2017. All that said, in terms of context, NATO still outspends Russia by a factor of 10. And even if you just consider NATO's European members, then the European members still outspend Russia by a factor of kind of 1 to 4. So there is still a huge gulf, even though that gap's narrowed slightly. But I would say that certainly one significant trend is that Russia now spends more than any individual NATO nation other than the US, and that's something that is a development over the last few years. So I'd say that in itself is a very significant development.